Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Dani and Andre found themselves entangled in a chain of events no one could have anticipated, beginning with what seemed like a harmless trip and spiraling into something far darker. The decision to board that flight had been Dani's, at least on the surface. Andre had presented her with 2 folded slips of paper, a childish little game of chance to decide their destination. Dani laughed at the gesture, too intoxicated to wonder why he had gone through the trouble. She picked one paper, unfolded it, and found the words Las Vegas scrawled in Andre's hurried handwriting. She glanced up, amused, and when she reached for the second paper out of curiosity, she saw the exact same destination written again. A sober Dani might have questioned him, teased him for stacking the game, demanded to know why he had tried to make her choice look like fate. But Dani wasn't sober. She was unsteady, her blood saturated with liquor, her mind fogged enough that skepticism slipped through her fingers. Instead, she grinned, muttered something about luck being on her side, and leaned into Andre's arm as if the universe itself had chosen their course. Andre smiled too, but his smile carried an edge that Dani never caught. He wasn't playing at destiny. He was guiding her toward it. And as the night swallowed them whole, neither of them could have predicted the turbulence waiting just beyond the horizon. Vernon felt the first tremor of unease long before he had any reason to suspect disaster. A father's intuition has a way of whispering long before the evidence speaks. He had been calling Dani repeatedly. It was unlike her not to send even a single text, not to return at least one of his calls. Vernon's voice grew tight with worry as he told Anita something wasn't right. Anita, ever the balance to Vernon's intensity, tried to steady him. She reminded him that Dani often leaned on Pamela when she needed company, that perhaps she had gone off on a trip with her friend and forgotten to check in. Anita's words were reasonable, but Vernon shook his head, the crease in his brow deepening. No, he insisted, his voice carrying the kind of certainty that cannot be reasoned away. Pamela didn't go with her. I think she's with someone else. Anita froze, the realization striking her harder than she expected. Dani with someone else? Whoa. The possibility cracked her composure, leaving her shaken in a way she didn't want Vernon to see. She sat silently for a moment, her mind racing. And in that silence Vernon's worry only grew louder. He called again. No answer. The signal had gone dark. The household filled with invisible weight. Vernon began searching for information about flights bound for Las Vegas, scrolling through departure times, cross-checking passenger manifests where possible, piecing together a picture with scraps of data that barely fit. Then came the chilling announcement. A flight to Las Vegas was reported to be experiencing severe weather complications. The airline could not reach the captain. Communications had failed mid-air. Anita's hand covered her mouth. Vernon's knuckles turned white around his phone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Neither wanted to say it out loud, but both knew what hovered on the edge of their thoughts. Dani was on that flight. While fear gripped the Dupree household, Anita's path intersected with Leslie in a way that neither had planned. The meeting began tense, almost hostile, with Anita bracing for confrontation. Leslie's history with the family had been complicated at best, bitter at worst. But this time Leslie wasn't the accuser. She wasn't the adversary. She was vulnerable, her eyes brimming with a raw need that softened even Anita's guarded heart. "Tell me about Barbara," Leslie pleaded. Her voice trembled, the request stripped of pride or pretense. "Tell me about my mother." Something inside Anita shifted. She had carried her own reservations about Leslie, but in that moment she didn't see an enemy. She saw a daughter longing for connection, for truth, for a piece of her history that had always felt unreachable. Anita sighed, her defenses crumbling. She began to recall memories she had buried deep, Barbara's laughter echoing in the hallways, the way her presence filled a room with warmth, the unshakable kindness she extended to everyone she touched. As Anita spoke, Leslie's face changed. The bitterness drained, replaced by a fragile gratitude. The anger she had harbored for years melted into something softer, something almost childlike. She listened as Anita painted Barbara not as an icon or a ghost but as a flesh and blood woman who had loved fiercely and lived brightly. "Thank you," Leslie whispered when Anita's voice finally trailed off. Tears glistened at the edges of her eyes. "Thank you for giving me the picture of her. I never I never had that before." For Anita, the encounter left its own mark. She realized Leslie was not the monster she had once feared. She was a young woman carrying wounds too heavy for her shoulders, a woman in search of identity and belonging. Anita thought, perhaps with surprising tenderness, that Leslie might yet become someone as strong and good-hearted as Barbara had been. But the question lingered like smoke after fire: would these memories soften Leslie's heart enough to release her grudge against the Duprees? Or would the warmth of Barbara's memory only sharpen the contrast of the pain she felt, making forgiveness even harder? The answer hung uncertain in the air. Even as Anita grappled with Leslie, another storm brewed within the family. Nicole, their other daughter, carried her own troubles, her marriage dangling on the edge of collapse. She confided in Anita, her voice heavy with resignation and regret. She admitted she was considering giving Dad another chance. Despite everything, despite the fractures between them, she felt the pull of history, of what they had once shared. But Dad had already shattered that fragile hope. He had slept with Leslie, an act Nicole could not excuse even if her heart wanted to. She knew it was true. Leslie had delivered the news herself, with cruel precision. Nicole didn't doubt her, not for a moment. The betrayal was too specific, too raw to be invented. And yet, what unsettled Nicole most wasn't the confirmation of Ted's failure but the ache of regret she felt despite it. Why did she mourn the possibility of reconciliation? Why did her heart twist with longing when she knew she should turn away in disgust? Was it love clinging stubbornly to its ruins, or was it simply fear of letting go? Anita listened as Nicole poured out her doubts, her confusion, her tangled emotions. As a mother, Anita wanted to guide, to protect, to give clarity. But what advice could she offer when her own world was unraveling? Her marriage to Vernon strained by unspoken fears, her encounters with Leslie stirring old wounds and new possibilities. And now Nicole, her other daughter, was standing at a crossroads between forgiveness and betrayal. The weight of it all pressed down on Anita, threatening to break her, but she refused to collapse. She carried the strength of Barbara's memory in her now, the tenderness she had shared with Leslie, the fierce love she felt for her daughters. She knew that whatever storms lay ahead, she would need every ounce of that strength to face them. Outside their walls, the storm in the sky still raged, tossing Dani and Andre into uncertainty. Inside, storms of a different kind brewed, storms of memory, of betrayal, of longing, of fractured love. And though none of them could see the full picture yet, all their paths were converging toward a reckoning that would demand truth, sacrifice, and the unraveling of secrets long held in silence. The silence after the airline's announcement stretched into hours, and each moment without word from Dani sharpened the dread that gripped Vernon's chest. He paced their living room like a man haunted, his phone clutched in his hand, his eyes scanning news updates that never told him what he most needed to know. Anita tried to steady him, but her own calm had begun to erode. What if the storm had swallowed their daughter whole? What if Dani's silence was more than stubbornness, more than negligence? What if it was final? Vernon's frustration swelled until it transformed into action. He called airline representatives, demanded clarity, argued with indifferent voices trained to soothe without answering. He pressed for flight numbers, for passenger confirmations, for any scrap of information that could anchor his spiraling mind. Each vague reply only stoked his fear. He began pulling contacts, asking favors, leaning on every thread of influence he had left. His desperation was raw, unfiltered, the kind that made Anita ache for him even as she feared he would break. Anita, however, carried her own secret storm. The conversation with Leslie lingered in her mind. She had looked into the girl's eyes and seen vulnerability that softened her guard, yet she couldn't forget the history between them. Leslie had carved wounds in their family that were not easily healed, and yet, when Anita replayed Barbara's memory aloud, she felt the sting of her own prejudice dissolve. She found herself wondering if fate had brought Leslie to her not as an enemy but as a chance at reconciliation. The complication lay with Nicole. Anita's other daughter carried bitterness Leslie had helped ignite. When Nicole learned the truth of Ted's betrayal, that he had given himself to Leslie, it became more than a marital wound. It became a scar that redefined her sense of trust. Yet what troubled Anita most was not Nicole's anger but her hesitation. Nicole confessed that part of her still wanted to believe Ted could change, that their shared history and fragile bond could outweigh his failure. Anita listened, torn between empathy and outrage. How could Nicole even consider giving Ted a second chance after what he had done? And yet, as a wife herself, Anita recognized the cruel power of love, how it made fools of even the strongest. The family's fractures deepened while Dani remained out of reach. Vernon's obsession with finding her consumed him. He barely slept, barely ate, his mind tethered to the idea that if he just pushed hard enough, he could save her from whatever peril the storm had delivered. Anita feared he was setting himself on a path that would break him if Dani's fate proved grim. And yet, in her heart, she shared the same hope, that Dani was out there, alive, waiting to be brought home. Andre's shadow loomed larger the longer Dani remained missing. Vernon began to wonder about the man she had chosen to accompany. Who was Andre really? Why had Dani kept his presence hidden from them? Was he protector or predator? Ally or enemy? The unknown haunted Vernon more than the storm itself. If Dani was alive, was she safe with him or had she stumbled into the arms of someone who had manipulated her from the start? Meanwhile, Leslie carried the weight of her conversation with Anita like a stone pressing against her chest. The image of Barbara that Anita had gifted her was both a comfort and a torment. For the first time, she saw her mother as a woman of warmth, not as a distant phantom or a symbol of grievance. That image stirred something inside her, a tenderness that threatened to dismantle years of bitterness. But bitterness is stubborn. Even as she clutched the memory, she felt anger rise, whispering that Barbara's goodness had been stolen from her, that Anita's family had lived with what she had been denied. Forgiveness hovered within reach, but vengeance still pulsed in her veins. Ted, caught in the wake of his own betrayal, drifted aimlessly between denial and regret. He wanted to believe that Nicole would give him another chance, that their marriage could be salvaged, but Leslie's revelation had left him exposed. Nicole's eyes when she confronted him were not the eyes of a woman who believed in her husband. They were the eyes of someone staring at a stranger. Ted's words stumbled, his excuses rang hollow, and though Nicole's heart ached with regret, her mind refused to bend. She couldn't deny the truth, even if part of her longed to. Anita saw the damage in Nicole's marriage and feared what it meant for the family as a whole. One daughter possibly lost in the storm, a husband unraveling with worry, and Leslie an unpredictable variable hovering at their edges, carrying both hope of reconciliation and threat of renewed conflict. The Duprees were fraying at every seam. Then came whispers that the airline had re-established brief, patchy contact with the missing flight. The plane was battered, caught in turbulence so fierce it felt like the sky itself was trying to tear it apart, but it was still aloft. Relief flooded Vernon and Anita in equal measure, though fear clung just as tightly. Survival was not guaranteed. Dani was still in danger, still suspended in the uncertainty of the storm. The reprieve sparked renewed conflict within Anita. If Dani survived, what then? Would she return whole, or broken? Would Andre still be at her side, and if so, what kind of man would he prove to be? The questions clawed at her as much as the silence had. Nicole, meanwhile, found herself confronting her own reflection more harshly than ever. Why did she still feel tethered to Ted despite everything? Why did her heart ache at the thought of losing him completely? She spoke to Anita in late-night whispers, confessing that she hated herself for caring. Anita held her, reminding her that grief and love were not logical, that sometimes the heart clung to ruins because it feared emptiness more. Nicole nodded, but her eyes revealed no relief. Leslie, emboldened by Anita's compassion but still torn by her own anger, began circling closer to the family, testing the boundaries of their acceptance. She presented herself softer, kinder, her demeanor reshaped by the memories Anita had given her. Yet beneath that new surface, resentment simmered, waiting for the smallest spark to reignite it. Whether she would choose peace or vengeance remained uncertain, and her presence kept everyone uneasy. The family hovered on the edge of collapse, pulled between storms both literal and emotional. Dani's fate in the skies, Vernon's unraveling resolve, Anita's strained balance between compassion and fear, Nicole's fractured marriage, Ted's desperation, Leslie's torn identity all converged like currents in a river heading toward a fall. No one spoke it aloud, but all felt the truth: something was coming, and none of them would emerge unchanged. The hours dragged into a night so long it felt endless. Vernon sat stiffly in his chair, his eyes locked on the muted television where the news replayed the same footage of storm systems curling violently over the flight path. Anita dozed and startled awake in turns, too restless to sleep, too exhausted to stay fully alert. Every buzz of a phone, every flicker of light from the screen, jolted them both upright with the hope of word from Dani. When confirmation finally came, it was neither salvation nor complete despair. The plane had landed hard, off course, battered but intact. Emergency crews rushed in, reports flooding the airwaves of injuries but miraculous survival. Vernon gripped Anita's hand so tightly it hurt, his throat thick with gratitude and terror all at once. Dani's name wasn't yet on any list, and the silence of her phone remained haunting. But the possibility of her survival changed everything. In those tense hours before her name was confirmed, each family member's choices sharpened into something final. Nicole stood in the kitchen, staring at her reflection in the darkened window, replaying Ted's betrayal and Leslie's revelation over and over. Part of her longed to believe that this brush with tragedy, the near loss of her sister, could realign her priorities, remind her of the love she once felt for Ted. But another part, harder and truer, whispered that his betrayal had cracked something beyond repair. When Anita approached quietly, offering a mother's embrace, Nicole confessed she didn't know how to forgive and wasn't sure she should even try. Anita, though burdened with her own fear for Dani, told her that strength sometimes meant letting go, not holding on. Ted, isolated from the family, spiraled into regret. He replayed his mistakes with Leslie, each memory a wound he couldn't close. He told himself it had been weakness, not malice, but the distinction didn't ease his shame. He waited for Nicole to give him a chance, a word. Anything but silence became his answer. The gulf between them stretched wider with every passing moment. Leslie, meanwhile, wandered the edges of the Dupree household like a ghost. Anita's stories of Barbara still lived inside her, glowing softly like embers. For the first time, she felt tethered to something beyond anger. And yet the old bitterness clawed at her, insisting she was an outsider, that no memory could erase the years of pain. She stood at the threshold, torn between stepping into reconciliation and retreating back into the comfort of resentment. When news finally confirmed Dani's survival, the flood of relief nearly knocked Vernon to his knees. She had been injured but not gravely, shaken but alive. Andre too was reported among the survivors, though his condition was unclear. Anita wept openly, her hands pressed to her face, her gratitude pouring out in broken whispers. For Vernon, the relief was fierce but complicated. Dani had survived, but with Andre at her side, his distrust of the man burned hotter than ever. Dani's return home was far from simple. She carried the weight of the crash, the raw terror of watching the storm swallow the sky, the memory of Andre gripping her hand as metal screamed and passengers prayed. She also carried the shame of her own drunkenness, the way she had let herself drift so far into escape that she hadn't noticed the warning signs, hadn't questioned Andre's manipulation of her choice. Survival didn't erase her mistakes, it only illuminated them. Vernon hovered close, unable to let her out of his sight, his questions sharp and insistent. Who was Andre to her? Why had she trusted him? Why had she hidden him? Dani, fragile and defensive, deflected what she could, but the strain between father and daughter deepened. Anita tried to mediate, reminding Vernon that Dani needed healing, not interrogation, but the fear of nearly losing her made him relentless. Andre, recovering separately, remained an enigma. To Dani he was savior and burden, comfort and danger all at once. His insistence on Las Vegas, his secrecy, his control, it all hung heavy in her mind. The crash had forced them closer, but in the silence afterward she began to see him differently. Was he truly her partner, or had she been just another piece in whatever game he was playing? As Dani struggled with those questions, Nicole reached her own breaking point. She confronted Ted one final time, not with accusations but with clarity. She told him she had loved him once, had wanted to believe in him, but that his choices had destroyed the foundation of their marriage. His betrayal with Leslie wasn't a mistake she could forgive, and she would not rebuild on broken ground. Ted begged, pleaded, swore he could change, but Nicole's resolve held. She walked away, tears streaming down her face, but with a strength she hadn't felt in years. Leslie watched from a distance, guilt gnawing at her. Anita's compassion had shown her another path, one where she could choose to honor Barbara's memory instead of feeding her bitterness. But guilt is not easily washed away. She realized that the role she had played in Nicole's heartbreak might never be forgiven, and perhaps shouldn't be. And yet, for the first time, she wanted to try. She approached Anita again, quieter this time, humbler, and asked not for stories but for guidance. Anita, weary but soft, didn't offer absolution but offered a Chancean invitation to step away from the shadows and into something better. The Dupree family, fractured though it was, began to stitch itself together in uneven, painful ways. Dani's survival became both a blessing and a mirror, reflecting all the weaknesses and strengths that had been hidden until crisis forced them into the open. Vernon's protectiveness, Anita's compassion, Nicole's resolve, Leslie's yearning, Ted's regret all tangled into a tapestry of imperfect people trying to find their way back to one another. The storm had nearly taken Dani, but in its wake it left something the family had long avoided: truth. Truth about love that couldn't be saved, truth about resentment that could soften, truth about mistakes that couldn't be undone. The ending wasn't neat, wasn't simple, but it was real. Dani would heal, though scars would remain. Nicole would rebuild, though loneliness would accompany her. Leslie would wrestle with her identity, though she now carried a flicker of Barbara's light within her. And Vernon and Anita, weathered by fear and loss, would continue holding their family together with the fragile but unbreakable threads of love. It wasn't the ending any of them had imagined, but it was survival. And sometimes, survival was enough.